We're now live on YouTube, Chairman.
Thank you, Jeanette. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of Boston Borough Council's Corporate Community Committee. My name is George Corner, and I'm the chair of this committee. And my vice chair is Deborah Evans, who will be joining us shortly around 7:15. Pippa, could you please take a roll call so everyone knows who's attending this meeting, please?
Thank you, Chair. If attendees could acknowledge their presence. Councillor Andorian.
We'll come back at the end there, Pippa.
Okay. Councillor Paul Goodale.
Present.
Councillor Frank Pickett.
Present.
Councillor Judith Skinner. Councillor Judith Wellborn.
Present.
Councillor Stephen Woodliff. And Councillor Paul Skinner.
Present.
And then also as the portfolio holder, we've got Councillor Jonathan Noble.
Present.
Sorry, Chair, Councillor Tom Ashton is just joining as well.
Yeah, I can see this.
And then for officers, we've got Assistant Director for Assets and Lead Officer for this committee, Andy Fisher.
Yes, present.
Climate Change and Environment Manager, Sarah Baker.
Yeah, present.
Assistant Director for Regulation, Christian Allen.
Good evening.
Chief Finance Officer and Section 151 Officer, Adrian Sibley.
Present.
Accountancy Manager for Revenue and Systems, Tim Sampson.
Present.
Accountant, Nicole Hayes.
Hello, this is Councillor Woodruff here, by the way. I'm sorry I was out of the room for a few minutes. Had to attend to something else. So you can include me on your list.
Thank you.
Okay.
And from Democratic Services, myself, Pippa Rose, and Jeanette Collier.
Present.
Thank you, Chair.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Pippa. We'll now move into part one.
I'm here too, Chair. Sorry about that.
Rightio.
I was with Councillor Woodliff.
Mr. Chairman, I have just been asked to substitute by Councillor Skinner, who I understand has sent in the relevant paperwork on behalf of Councillor Danny. Could I just confirm that that's okay?
That's been received. Councillor Ashton, thank you for that. Just before we go into part one there, Pippa, is there anyone else that didn't you receive a response there for attendance?
Councillor Judith Skinner, I believe.
Rightio.
I did say here.
Oh, sorry.
It's all right.
Excellent. So we'll move into part one now. To receive any apologies for absence and notice of substitutions, if any.
Thank you, Chair. We've got 2 apologies received from Councillor Alan Bell, with Councillor Goodall, in attendance as substitute. Councillor Howard has also sent his apologies, but with no substitute. And then Councillor Anton Danny, with Tom Ashton as his substitute.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Now to confirm the accuracy of the minutes for the meeting held on the 21st of January for me to sign. Now, these are confidential minutes, so if any member wishes to query their accuracy, I'll defer the minutes until the end of the meeting to avoid going into an exempt session at this stage, as it would mean we'd have to keep the public waiting. So has anyone got any comments on the minutes there that we wish to defer, or are you happy to agree that the minutes that we've got a correct record there? Thank you. We'll move on to part 3. To receive any declarations of interest in respect of any of the items on this agenda, please use the raise hand facility. Nothing there. And then we'll go on to part 4 to receive any written questions from any members of the public there.
There are none, Chair.
Thank you for that. So that concludes part 1. We'll go into part 2 there. The first item up this evening is the Climate Change and Environment Update. The report's been compiled by Sarah Baker, Climate Change and Environment Manager. Ms. Baker, would you please kindly present your report?
Yes, thank you. So the purpose of the report this evening really is to
update the committee on the progress of the 9 recommendations that were agreed by full council just over a year ago, so back in January 2020. Those recommendations followed the work of the Climate Change Working Group established by the E&P Committee. So say just to give you some information about the progress of those, and to also share with you draft environment policy for consideration, as well as to just outline some of the next steps really for the climate change and environment work programme. I don't propose to go through all of the recommendations in detail. They're in the appendix to the report, but we just felt it was timely really to take stock of where things were at, primarily because since the Strategic Alliance, and I suppose since about autumn time of last year, that's provided some resource in myself working with Christian Allen to sort of take forward some of the work on those recommendations. I think it's fair to say that prior to that there hadn't really been the dedicated resource to be able to do that. And obviously with COVID as well this year, that's sort of taken additional resourcing. So there hadn't been the opportunity to really focus on that. But that isn't to say that progress hasn't been made. And I hope, you know, when members have looked through the recommendations, they will see that despite the lack of resourcing to take forward a lot of it, there has still been some progress. So, for example, we now have a corporate priority around climate change and the environment. We now have a system by which climate change and environment considerations are part of all committee reports and a process for doing that. So, so there have been bits of progress on there. So I think it's a kind of good footing to start with. I was just going to go through some of the key next steps, I suppose. And again, I won't cover everything that's in the report in detail, but happy to take any questions afterwards. I think the main thing really, as I say, we have the corporate strategy now. And the idea of the environment policy really is to underpin that strategy by setting out the key objectives for the council as a whole. It's designed to be quite a simple document, and to make sure that all service areas are really aware and working to the same objectives. So that environment policy sets out 4 key themes. We did a similar thing in East Lindsey, and that was adopted in November of last year. So the environment policy that's before you today, that really, it has the same themes to enable us to align, as I say, things like the committee reports and also, for example, projects, templates and things like that. So that the same considerations can be used across both councils, but obviously within each of those themes there are things that are specific to Boston. So Boston, for example, has declared a climate change emergency, and there are other kind of things within those themes that are unique and relevant to Boston, but by and large it's a similar process, and that really sets the mandate for the climate change and environment programme. In terms of next steps, I think the key thing really that we're looking at to focus on at the moment is around the carbon reduction agenda. And one of those pieces of work will be to commission the Carbon Trust to produce a carbon reduction plan for Boston. Again, it's a similar process that we've undertaken over the last year in East Lindsey. The Carbon Trust are really experts in the field of doing that. And in producing that carbon reduction plan, it will provide the pathway for how we will reach the targets. So you'll recall in Boston's current target is to be net zero in advance of the UK government. Now, I suspect that as part of the process we'll go through with the Carbon Trust, we will need to narrow that down a little bit more to ensure that we've sort of got a date that we can work towards. And it may also be necessary to put in some interim steps for that target. For example, in East Lindsey, we have set a target to be net zero by 2040, with a 45% reduction by 2027. So we may need to do a similar thing in Boston, but that will be part of the process with the Carbon Trust, and it will involve relevant officers and members as part of that piece of work. It will also give us a really good baseline to work from. And the proposal is that will look at the 2019 year, because obviously 2020 isn't going to be particularly representative with the ways of working as they've been, etc. I think the other advantage of having that piece of work done is that we'll have the same outline plan both at Boston and East Lindsey, and therefore we'll be able to look at where there are opportunities to align those plans and identify joint projects, and obviously hopefully cost savings as well through that. Some of the other key next steps really are around ensuring that all kind of officers and members as well have a good awareness of the implications of climate change and what we are able to do, both as individuals and as organisations to help tackle that. It has been something that both members and officers have expressed an interest in. So we're looking to implement a carbon literacy training programme to be rolled out later this year. And hopefully that will be helpful. There's a lot of I think we're all aware of climate change, but there's a lot of terminology that is often used that sometimes isn't as familiar to everybody. So I think it'll be a really helpful exercise in getting everybody on board, because as I've said time and time again at East Lindsey, it'll be the same at Boston. There is quite a culture change that will be needed to achieve the targets that we've set. So it's really important that everybody's sort of on board and understands the issues and the challenges for that. I think recognising that we have a role to play in the carbon reduction agenda, there's also quite a role for the council in terms of leadership and setting an example and supporting the wider borough on this agenda. So a big part of the work over the next year will be around producing a climate change strategy for the Strategic Alliance as a whole, which really kind of sets the wider context. And so what we do as a council in terms of our emissions is very, very small compared to across the wider borough and the Alliance as a whole. And again, I think having that aligned approach will be really helpful. And sort of following on and linked to that really will be the establishment of a climate change assembly for Boston. It was something that was highlighted in the recommendations that were adopted last January. And the idea of that really will be to bring wider partners and key stakeholders together. And I think how we see that working really will not necessarily be for the council to be driving that the whole way through, but I think we have a really important role in setting that up, say leading by example, and then supporting that assembly, which will hopefully then sort of run itself to look at what we can do across different sectors to really look at bringing down carbon emissions across the borough as a whole. So I think those are the key areas of work to highlight. As I say, happy to take questions on some of the other things that are mentioned in the report. I was just finally going to pick up a little bit about around resourcing. So obviously that's always the big question, isn't it? I think in terms of the carbon reduction plan, that will require obviously investment in getting that plan established. And we're looking at a cost of around £18,000 for that. Beyond that, in terms of what that plan will put forward in terms of next steps and how we approach carbon reduction, it's fair to say we don't really know what the full costs of that will be as yet. And there will be an awful lot of work to go into determining that in terms of feasibility and things like that. But we will obviously bring those projects back through the relevant committees and council as appropriate over the next few years. It's also worth saying there is quite a lot of government funding around for various projects at the moment. So we've already seen an example of that through the Public Sector Decarbonisation Fund, which we applied to BEIS, Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, in October of last year, and we were successful in getting some funding through that to enable a feasibility study regarding carbon reduction opportunities at the municipal buildings in St John's Depot. So that's a fully funded study which has provided us with a lot of information that we can then take away and work up now hopefully into some more formal project proposals and look at sort of the costings of that, with a view then to being able to fund most of that work, hopefully again through government grants. There was a follow-up scheme to that Public Sector Decarbonisation Fund, which unfortunately was oversubscribed, and we were, I say, not in a position to be able to apply for that. But in theory, it would have funded a lot of that work. And I think that's a good example of where we need to be over the next year or so, is actually having, you know, projects that are worked up and ready to go, that we can look at to apply for funding as it becomes available, because it does tend to be quite last minute. So yeah, I think that kind of covers the key points, but as I say, I'm sure that there will be questions, so happy to answer any of those.
Thank you, Sarah. With the report complete, I'll open the matter to any debate and questions. Councillor Hasty, you've joined us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to let you know, I'm substituting for Councillor Spencer. I found out at the last minute, hence I'm a bit late. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Councillor Hasty. Pippa, you're okay to make a note of that there?
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Excellent, thank you. And in order, we've got Councillor Woodliff. Can you please come to the screen?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Chairman? Can you see me, Chairman?
Yeah.
You can, right, it's very good, okay. But the question really, I suppose, is about the report itself, because there's a lot of kind of aspirations in it, but nothing much beyond it, really. I mean, clearly the refuse collection vehicles are probably the prime emitters of CO2 as far as the council are concerned, unless there's anything else it is, because they're on the road all the time. So what plans are there to replace the current fleets of refuse vehicles with vehicles which are non-emitters of carbon dioxide? And that'd be electric, wouldn't they? Now, I don't know whether there are any suitable electric vehicles around to do. There are, you know, obviously electric vehicles that are, you know, for milk floats and that type of thing. But I'm not sure I've seen anything around where you have refuse vehicles which are super, you know, which are all electric. And we'd have to think about, if we do that, we'd have to think about some way of charging these vehicles on the road, won't we? The way they operate. I don't know what's about it. It's an interesting report, and it kind of sets people's thoughts in motion, but bit thin in places. It's kind of like encouraging people to think about it. Well, I think we can think about it, but I'm looking for some hard and fast ideas, because we're going to be carbon zero by 2030. We've got to get a move on, haven't we? And I don't know quite within this where we are going. So, Chairman, pass it around to other people. That's kind of overview. I'm not criticising anybody. I understand the problem is a very complicated one. It's very difficult to deal with. But I'm passing it around anyway. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Woodliff. Christian, would you like to come in there?
Thank you. Yes. I think just back to the first point, the last point that Councillor Woodliff raised in terms of the target is a net zero ahead of the government's target. So just to clarify that, in terms of, I guess, in terms of where we're at in terms of our plans, and the point made about the plans being a bit thin, I think that is an understandable comment. I can understand that. The trajectory that Sarah has very eloquently set out before members today effectively puts in place the strategic and the policy platform that we need to move forward. Without that, we don't have a sustainable position with which to start delivering on this agenda. So that would be the first point I would make. Naturally, from this process, once we've got an agreed policy in place, once we've got a climate change strategy in place, and now that we're starting to assemble the resources that we need, we can start to deliver actions, starting with a carbon reduction plan, but also deliver a range of other actions that will start to have a, they'll start to see the positive or the tangible benefits that Councillor Woodliff is alluding to. And then just finally on the waste fleet infrastructure, obviously the waste fleet were replaced have only just been replaced. They have a 7-year life cycle. We did look at, because I was head of operations at the time, we did look at electric vehicles, but the technology for refuse vehicles and their electric capability is new, and it is extremely expensive. You're looking at least £250,000 for a refuse freighter compared with a conventional diesel refuse freighter of about £170,000. And also we have challenges in terms of their range. At the moment, the range of the refuse freighters that are available that are electric isn't sufficient to service an area such as Boston with its outlying villages, or even East Lindsey. That technology, I'm sure, will start to come on board, and when it does, and the prices start to become more reasonable and affordable, then I'm sure we'll start to look at that technology. And in the meantime, we'll be looking at the infrastructure that's available at our depots and our buildings to provide charging points for when those sorts of vehicles are available to us and affordable. I would just add finally that obviously the refuse freighters that we do have are Euro 6 standards. They are the cleanest diesel engine vehicles that are currently available on the market in terms of diesel fueled vehicles. So I'll leave it there in case there's obviously some other questions.
Thank you, Christian. Councillor Wellborn.
Good evening, Chairman, and thank you. My point is, with the warm home funds that the government is pushing out, they're on about replacing the older type storage heaters with either gas or LPG gas. Now, as I understand, obviously these are going to be not carbon friendly. So I just wondered what our stance is on the fact that this has been advertised on our site, and a lot of people are probably going to try and take it up. Thank you.
Thank you. Christian, would you like to come back to that one?
I wonder whether actually something that Sarah's closer involved with. So I'll let Sarah respond to that one.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think if you're referring to the Links for Warmer Homes scheme, is that the one? Yeah. So it's quite a complex one, because obviously as things stand at the moment, so there's two schemes around at the moment. There's the Links for Warmer Homes scheme, which you're right, we'll look at putting in place new central heating systems, and that can, my understanding is that can include gas heating. The newer schemes, I guess, that are around are the Green Homes grants. There are lots of different streams to that Green Homes grant funding that the government has. And under those, you can't install new gas heating systems. So, for example, Boston, that Green Homes grant, the local authority delivery element of that has allocated some funding to Boston. We're waiting to get the final figure as to what that will be, but later this year we should hopefully be able to draw down some funding to provide grants to residents, and that doesn't allow for new fossil fueled installations, so it is looking more at things like air source heat pumps. I think perhaps, and forgive me because the Links for Warmer Homes is slightly, I'm not as familiar with that as others, because it's kind of been around for a little while before I started, but I think with that it was kind of more about tackling some of the challenges of fuel poverty, and obviously the climate change agenda is a big part of that, and I think that may well kind of evolve, but it's kind of, I guess, more about kind of the desperate measures that are needed, whereas I think the Green Homes grants really provide more of a focus on decarbonisation of heating, so they tend to look at things like air source heat pumps, but it is quite a complex one because the air source heat pumps themselves aren't necessarily the answer to everything, because you need the homes to be very well insulated. They work on the basis of a kind of constant low level of heat. So unless the actual fabric of the buildings is up to standard, you won't feel the full benefit of those. And they have other issues in the fact that they actually increase the electricity demand of buildings. So in terms of energy performance, it can be quite a tricky one, because sometimes it can actually reduce the energy performance of the building in terms of the fact that electricity bills have gone up. So I think in terms of solutions to heating across the borough, I think we will still see an emerging picture on that over the coming years, really. And it will be, I think, for some time, a bit of a balance between addressing the issues of fuel poverty and looking at how we do that. And obviously, I think at the moment, the electric heating, the idea of that being, as a country, we will be moving to renewable supplies more and more as time goes on. So that's kind of why the kind of electric heating tends to be perhaps favoured a little bit more. But I don't think, as you say, it's quite a complex one at the moment, because there isn't necessarily a clear winner if you're moving away from gas central heating. And I think it's a challenge not just for us, but for us as a country, that there's still quite a lot of work to be done on, really, in terms of how that will eventually play out. So sorry, that's probably not the most succinct or comprehensive answer, but I think that there's still quite a challenge ahead, really, and I think it will ultimately be a mixture of solutions.
Yeah, it's just the fact we had storage heaters installed a while ago. We used to have a solid fuel park ray, and we, in a housing association, they've scrapped all solid fuel. As now we've got storage heaters. Our house wasn't suitable for the heat pump one, but it is extremely expensive. We can't heat the whole of our house with them. So I'm just thinking of young families that have to do this. I hope somebody finds a solution, because there's going to be a lot more people in fuel poverty. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Wellborn. The portfolio holder, Councillor Skinner, you indicated to speak there. Is it to this matter?
Yes, it is. I was just going to say there's lots of things going on at the moment. The next phase of building regulations will be out very shortly, and that is about very nearly zero inputs to heat and cool our houses. So around that, there's going to be some quite big advances. But along with that, you can bet what's going to happen is the residual housing stocks that we've got, everybody is going to be encouraged to increase their insulation and the way they do things. And as alluded to, you know, all technologies, as you well know, Chairman, is certainly on the electrical side, is advancing at quite a pace. So quite an exciting area. Picking up on what Christian was saying about the refuse fleet, there are also other things happening around there. We've got other. I was looking at Renault, and Renault are looking at hydrogen cells and signed up with a partnership only this week. I know there's Mercedes and some of the other marques have had vehicles running around Europe for probably the last 10, 15 years using hydrogen, but they've never really got in the state, let's say, to be commercially viable. So lots and lots of technologies emerging. So what this document does for me, it provides the framework. We're going to do some work with the Carbon Trust to point us in the right sort of direction, but it's a framework to move things on. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Skinner. Councillor Goodale.
Thank you, Chairman. Just really a question on the resourcing page, really. There is, well, in the report, it says that there's interest-free government funding for public sector loans available to tackle carbon reduction agendas. I was wondering, would that actually cover local authority housing, new build housing, and would this authority be able to actually gain interest-free loans to actually build council houses? that are carbon free or low carbon housing.
Thank you, Councillor Goodall. Sarah, would you be able to come in there?
I don't know the answer to that, but I can look into it. I just know that the fund itself is for carbon reduction, but I don't know whether that would support something like that. But yeah, I can go away and have a look.
Excellent. If we could look at a response after the meeting, that'd be fantastic, unless anyone's got the answer to that here and now. If that's okay with you, Councillor Goodall. Excellent. Next we have Councillor Skinner. The other Skinner.
Thank you, Chair. Yes. I'd just like to say thank you to Sarah and her team for this report. It's good to see things are moving forward. As regards the draft policy, on theme 3, the second point, ensuring planning policy sets strong ambition for low carbon, blah, 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 and for housing development schemes. In the past, when I've always asked about our planning department encouraging energy efficient housing developments, I've always been told that the planners have found the technology too expensive with all the flood mitigation and everything that we've got. Are prices of things coming down enough to make it a viable opposition for our developers? And also on theme 4, it says promote sustainable travel behaviours amongst local authority employees. I think we should also add council members as well to that. So I think we ought to be playing our part as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Skinner. Christian?
Yeah, I'm happy to come back on the first point that Councillor Judith Skinner raised. I think rather like Paul Skinner has said in his response, this country has spent many years building houses the way that it's always built them, and I think without a clear steer in terms of government policy or government direction, then the market isn't going to develop and the technologies aren't going to develop. What we're hearing from the government currently is that in terms of the recovery from the pandemic, I think Boris Johnson wants that to be a green recovery, and there's lots of very positive rhetoric now around potentially developing incentives for builders, developing incentives for homeowners to sort of start to take advantage of some of these technologies that perhaps weren't available to us or weren't affordable sort of 10 years ago. So I think we will start to see a slow change in the housing market in terms of new build properties, and also a change in the way that we all run our homes going forward, with some of the modifications and the developments that are coming forward that can be retrofitted to properties that we all live in. So I think the paper and the policy set out today is a sort of an ambition and intention to take advantage of that situation and to position ourselves strategically to be able to do that. So I'm sure we will get to a there's no answer to that, but it's a positive developing picture, I think, that we'll hope to see some changes coming forward.
Keep pushing for that, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And your second question, Julie, sorry.
The last point was about theme 4, adding, as well as local authority employees promoting sustainable travel behaviours, that council members should as well.
Sarah, did you want to come in on that? You've done a lot of work on that.
Yeah, no, I think that seems very sensible. Yeah, I don't see any reason why that shouldn't be added in, really. It seems to make sense.
Yeah. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Councillor Skinner. Councillor Hasty.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry, I couldn't find the button there for a minute. It's following on from what Councillor Wellborn said about heating the homes.
Yeah.
In Christmas 2020, Waterloo changed my house's heating from an oil tank to the air source heating. Now the radiators are quite big, and you have to have two radiators per room. but on average, the electric usage here has dropped and cost has dropped about 30%. So it's well worth, the air source heating is well worth the money and the expense and the hassle of having it around.
Thank you, Councillor Hasty. Next, we have Councillor Ashton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And first of all, thank you, Sarah, for a splendid piece of work. I think having access to your expertise on this is one of the huge positives of the Strategic Alliance. At the same time, I would also say I'm very sorry because you're probably fairly familiar with what I'm about to say. I'm going to pick up on theme 3, and some of this has already been covered. It's interesting here, we've got the South East Link local plan, which isn't due for review perhaps for another couple of years, by which time I think there will be greater clarity through the government's environment bill around what is expected on net gain and how that affects the planning process. And it will also be interesting to see what by that point has come out of the planning white paper, which has floated around for a little while now without making a huge degree of progress. There was a lot of big headlines when it was launched, but it remains to be seen what is left of those proposals by the time the government adopts them. At the end of the day, planning policy does always seem to lag a little bit because simply the process of which plans need to be gone through in terms of review and adoption. And also, of course, we're restrained by the amount of scope which we are given to influence design. We're told that we have to promote good design. However, different councillors have wildly different views of what good design is. And as Sarah and anyone else who's listened to me talk on this subject before will know that I really dislike, I think they're grossly inefficient, are crammed together detached houses because you lose valuable land in the gap between them. The energy efficiency decreases having external walls, and the amount of building materials required goes up because, again, you've got to have external walls and finishing details which most people will never see because you can't hardly fit between them. I'm a passionate supporter in circumstances like that of high quality terracing, and several people have shared with me today a story that's come out. I think it's completely nonsense about potentially replacing bungalows with Georgian terraces. It's not going to happen. It's certainly not going to happen around here. But the concept of better quality land use and more energy efficient housing, I think is an entirely valid one, and it will remain to be seen the extent to which we have the policy tools to craft any of that into reality. But from my perspective, I would wholeheartedly support using whatever tools we get over the next couple of years. And it's really good to see this included here. My further comment, I suppose, would be it is incredibly reassuring to see that the Borough Council is taking this issue as seriously as it is. In other roles that I have involved around Humber strategy and Lincolnshire coast, what the world looks like in 2100 with climate change is incredibly, it involves some incredibly serious thinking, and if any of it come to pass, will involve some incredibly difficult policy choices across Lincolnshire over the next 25 or 50 years. So it's good that we're addressing some of this now. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Ashton. Do we have anybody else wishing to speak on this topic? Councillor Dorian.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I'm a bit like Councillor Woodliffe. I'm a little bit disappointed in the report, in the little amount that we seem to have done. I've got some questions for Councillor Skinner, because the report's in his name. I'm thinking back, Councillor Skinner, to the 20th of January 2020, when we took the report from the Task and Finish group to full council and it went through unanimously. And looking back now, actually, we were so full of hope and expectation and enthusiasm. And not that I've got any experience, I've been trying to think of an analogy, and really it's like the premature ejaculation of all council reports, because nothing has been done, and we've been left high and dry, really, without being fulfilled. I'd like to pick up on 2.2, because at the time you were the portfolio holder, and since the month after the report went to full council, you've been leader. And yet the report says there was limited resourcing available to action our recommendations. So what exactly did you do in that regard to access resources for the recommendations we put forward?
Thank you, Councillor Dorian. Councillor Skinner.
Well, I'm assured that you'll quite understand how budgets work, because that's the next subject along the line.
I do.
Basically, if it's not in the budget, it's not there to be had. We have actually dragged all of this on quite a way, considering it was on a zero budget. And I think there's been tremendous efforts being made. We've got a real good framework. But the whole point of what Sarah was saying earlier, it's not quite what we do as Boston Borough Council, and not quite what we do as members. It's actually getting the message out to the general public and getting them to change their habits. From our point of view, we've done really quite a lot. Every time we purchase something, we're looking at getting the best we can for our money. It's not a carte blanche, you know, that widget does it better than that. It's actually got to be value for money over the time period of purchasing. And, you know, one of the things that I've been used to doing within my professional life is looking at whole life costs. And I think we're moving to looking at whole life costs, which actually include the disposal of vehicles and things like that. All of these things make a big difference to our carbon footprint and what we do. And hopefully we'll leave things better than when we started. Thank you.
May I continue, Chair?
Yep.
Thank you. Well, you answered several questions there, but none of them were any I asked. I asked about what you had done to secure resources so that we could implement the recommendations made in the full council meeting on the 20th of January. But that's fine. But hold that thought that one of the thoughts you just mentioned, the thought about it's our responsibility to get the public to do more, because I will come on to that. Sorry, did you want to answer?
Well, I just answered that question. We've got resources within the budget we have. It's not carte blanche just to spend silly amounts of money. We have to work within a budget, and that's how councils and businesses work. I did answer your question. You just weren't listening. Thank you.
Oh, there's no need to be disrespectful. I listened intently to your answer. However, the question I was asking you was, as portfolio holder when we did the task and finish, and then subsequently as leader, what did you do to secure resources? Because you could have wired money from somewhere. I know exactly how budgets work. You could have dipped into reserves if you'd wanted to. If you didn't want to, that's fine. But I do know how budgets work, and I did listen to your answer. So moving on. Could you tell me, under 2.4, could you tell me exactly when we might commission the Carbon Trust? Councillor Skinner.
I think we're exploring at the moment, because we've got a amount in the budget to go and do it, and we're just waiting for the time when the Carbon Trust can get back to us, because I believe they are quite busy at the moment, and also there's something called a pandemic on as well. I think that might be a little bit to do with it. Thank you.
May I continue, Chair?
Yeah, I think the best thing in this instance, Councillor Doran, is if we go through the questions that you've got outstanding then, and maybe Councillor Skinner can sort of answer them one at a time, just for...
I'd rather not, Chair, if you don't mind, because I've made some notes. So if you don't mind, I'll continue. So under 2.7, excuse me, we're talking about the environmental policy, given as the mandate for climate change and environmental action. But I felt that when we did the task and finish, that gave the council a mandate to move things forward. And so I feel that 2.7 is a bit woolly and could be used as an excuse to hold us back. Indeed, it does look like it's been an excuse to hold us back. And so my concerns about the environmental policy, and I've no idea if it's gone to EMP, but I would encourage it not to go straight forward to Cabinet, because I think this should be a whole council initiative and other elected members should have a say in it. In addition to that, I didn't have time in the 5 days between getting the report and coming to the meeting. I didn't have time to research the environmental policy to know that it is the best fit for us. And I like to do my homework. So I'm uncomfortable with it moving forward, but I'm certain to lose that argument. The point I want to come to now is under 3.1, Councillor Skinner, and it's the one I referenced just a moment ago and asked you to hold the thought, where it says, you said we've got responsibility to the wider public, and I agree with you wholeheartedly, we do. Yet under 3.1, it recommends that we have a handle on our own activities before we reach out to the wider public. So which is it? Is it that we get our own house in order and then take a leadership role with the public? Or shouldn't we be doing both, as the task and finish group recommended?
I would agree. We need to do both.
So then, should we look at 3.1 and then strike that out, perhaps?
Well, the whole point of scrutiny is that suggestions come to it. That's what the process. And after that, if the recommendation is that bit needs to change before it goes to Cabinet, I'm sure we can work something up that works for us all.
Okay, thank you. I apologise if I missed this, Councillor Skinner, but under 3.2, when is the carbon literacy training programme going to start for staff members and elected members?
I believe that it's supposed to be in this time, 2021, but I do not have a date for it. I can research that and I can drop you an email maybe.
Oh, that would be novel. Thank you. Yes, I would like that very much. Under 3.3, we talk about a climate change strategy for the whole strategic alliance. And I'm really concerned about that, because I think, and that's linked to 3.5 as well, really, I think that makes the whole thing far too big. Because although climate change is a global phenomenon and it needs a global response, I think that in this instance, small would be better. And I think we need our own climate change strategy just for Boston and the borough of Boston. And I think if we try to merge the two district councils, we're looking at a massive geographical area, and what's right for, you know, up in North Somercourts, or if that's in East Lindsey, is not going to be right for Sutterton. So again, I would make, well, I'll probably recommend that we don't do that. But what are your thoughts, Councillor Skinner?
I'm waiting back to listen to what the scrutiny decides to recommend to Cabinet. I'm listening as always.
So you're open to that idea then?
I can see the benefit of writing a policy in a way that can be used in a way across two separate councils, but I believe Sarah explained very carefully that certain bits of that would apply to Boston. There'll be some very definite Boston bits, and there'll be some very definite East Lindsey bits, because as far as I'm concerned, I believe that we're actually ahead of East Lindsey at this time.
Okay, thank you. Under 4.1, could you explain that to me? Because I simply can't get my head around it and I don't understand the language at all.
Which bit in 4.1?
Well, it's only 2 lines, it's only 1 sentence. I just honestly don't understand it.
Would you explain to me which bit you don't understand then, please?
All of it.
Just read it out for me, please, because you know I have trouble reading.
No, we're not here for that, Councillor Skinner.
Well, if you would like to ask the officer exactly what you mean. So I didn't write the policy. It's been written for me, but I think it's been written in a very professional way, and I would quite support it. However, if there are any things where we can improve, that's the whole point of scrutiny.
It's not a policy, it's a report. I'm not referring to the policy document, I'm referring to the report. And yes, I know the officer's written it, but I would expect you to understand it. So I'm happy for anyone to explain it to me.
Anybody, Sarah, are you able to assist with the question there?
Yeah, of course. So essentially what that's saying is that this council has acknowledged that there is a climate change and environment emergency. Climate change and environment emergency. And in declaring that, it suggests that this council needs to take action. And that action will have quite quite a profound impact, really, both in terms of the way that services are operated and the potential funding implications that may have. But in making that declaration and acknowledging that, the impact will be less than if we do nothing and wait 10, 15, 20 years, because the issues won't go away. And if anything, if we don't start to take action now, we'll be in a far worse place further down the line. So that's really what that is intended to say, that this council's recognised as an issue, and while it will have a significant impact for us, actually starting to address it early on is better than waiting to the last minute and then being in a far worse position.
Thank you, Sarah.
Okay. So the profound impact for the council will be less so in the long term than seeking to do nothing. It's grammatical nonsense. And I think that needs to be rewritten in layman's terms. Okay. Moving on, 4.2, Councillor Skinner, what lobbying has been done to date to secure any additional funding from government?
What, regarding to the environmental bits? No, because I've not needed to, because there's been funds that we've applied for. But as we've just said in the presentation, the funds have got short lead time, so we need to work up projects so they're ready to go. So that was part of the presentation.
That was one of our recommendations, though, wasn't it, that we lobby government from 13 months ago. And in fact, I co-signed a letter with Councillor Judith Skinner to Matt Warman to lobby for funding. Was there any response to that?
Not at this point, but well, I've not seen a response to it because I didn't sign it, but I would have thought something would have come back. Certainly, as we form our plans when this paperwork goes through, then there'll be something to lobby, won't there? But at this point, we're early doors.
I thought, being leader, you would have been aware. That's all. And being able to take the advantage of your position as leader to lobby government for funding, your government. Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Dorian. Councillor Noble, would you like to come in there? You're muted, Councillor Noble.
Reading me loud and clear now, Councillor Corner? Yes. Yes?
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, a couple of points. I do agree with Councillor Dorian that 4.1 does need to be rewritten because it could be written in a more clear way. But it's just a factual observation. Councillor Dorian said that the climate change, when it was debated in full council, was unanimously approved. It wasn't. I voted against it because I don't accept there is a climate emergency. Perhaps a climate crisis, not a climate emergency.
Is that everything there, Councillor Noble?
Well, thank you.
Thank you with that. Well, I think
I just apologise to Councillor Noble. I sincerely apologise. I didn't remember that.
It's quite a lot, Councillor Dorian.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I'm conscious that we've got a second part there of the another big subject to discuss. So unless anyone's got anything pertinent to bring to the table, we've got the recommendation in front of us here. That the committee recognises the progress already achieved in delivering the 9 recommendations approved by full council in January 2020 and supports the next steps as outlined in this paper, and that the committee recommends the adoption of the environment policy to Cabinet. Now, do I have a proposer? Going once. Councillor Wellborn.
I'll propose it, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Wellborn. And do we have a seconder? Councillor Pickett. Oh, and Councillor Skinner as well. And Councillor Dorian. In order, Councillor Pickett, do you wish to second that? I'll take that as a yes. You're muted there.
Yes, I second that, Chairman.
Thank you. Rightio. So with that said, Pippa, would you please take the vote?
Mr. Chair, I didn't raise my hand to second it. I raised my hand to move an amendment because I thought it had been seconded.
Rightio. So could you please, Pippa, is this the point where Councillor John would read out her amendment with having Councillor Pickett seconded there?
Sorry, I'll have to look for Jeanette on that one, as I'm not.
Yes, Chairman. If you'd like to go ahead, Councillor Dorian.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, perhaps I could just have some information. Has the environmental policy gone to EMP yet?
It has. It went to EMP on the 5th of January.
Okay. All right then.
And it was approved with no amendments, Councillor Dorian.
Okay. All right then. I won't move an amendment then. I'll leave that. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, Pippa, could we please go to the vote?
Thank you, Chair. If members could state whether they are for, against, or wish to abstain the proposal. Councillor Tom Ashton.
For.
Yourself, Chair.
For.
Councillor Anne Dorian.
For.
Councillor Paul Goodall.
For.
Councillor Neil Hasty.
For.
Councillor Frank Pickett.
For.
Councillor Judith Skinner.
For.
Councillor Judith Wellborn.
For.
And Councillor Stephen Woodliff.
For.
That's unanimous, Chair. Thank you.
Pippa. And that will bring us on to the second part of the agenda tonight. We've got the draft budget setting report and medium-term financial strategy for 2021-22 through to 2025-26 for consultation. This report tonight will be presented by Adrian Sibley, the Chief Finance and Section 151 Officer. Mr. Sibley, would you kindly present the report there?
Thank you, Chair. I bring this report in front of members tonight as part of the consultation process for budget setting and agreeing the medium-term financial strategy. So as part of the consultation process, it's gone out to the public. It's also gone to audit and governance, and it's also been subject to a member briefing, and now bring it before you as well as part of that process. I would just like to point out, Chair, if I may, that I've got 2 colleagues of mine from the Finance Department in the meeting tonight. The first is Tim Sampson, who I think you're all familiar with, who is the accounting manager. The other is Nicole Hayes, who is part of the Future Leaders programme, and Nicole and Tim have both been heavily involved in the budget process. So I'd like to thank them for their help, and Tim in particular is here to answer any particular difficult questions. So moving on to the report itself, I will give a summary rather than go into detail because it has been through several forums, and I know that pretty much all of the members here tonight have already debated this once or twice already. So we are in a strong position for next year. Budget is healthy for next year. It's following years that we have the problem. The reason for this is my predecessor would have reported to you last year exactly the same as I'm reporting to you now, that the problem is next year, not this year. The reason why the problem has moved down the road a year is because the fair funding review, which was due to take place during the last year, has actually been delayed a year because of the coronavirus. So what the fair funding review does is it's a government initiative where it looks at reallocating funding where there is most need within local government. It's widely anticipated that as part of that, it will move funding from districts and boroughs to county councils and unitaries to fund things like adult social care and children's services, where it's widely recognised that that's where the majority of the pressure points are going forward. So the problem isn't for next year, it's the subsequent years, which is why we are proposing a council tax increase of £4.95. We have a limit of 2% or £5, whichever is the greatest. So that's what we are proposing tonight. For members, I can't say any more than that, Chair, but I'm happy to take questions or pass them on to Tim. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. You're quite right. It's been through a number of forums this before. But with that concluded, I will open it up to any questions that members have. Please use the raise hand facility.
I thought we're home and dry there, Chair.
Nearly, but not quite. So we have Councillor Goodale.
Thank you, Chairman. I know you say a lot of members have actually debated this before. I have to say it's the first time that I've actually seen a lot of this. On the business rates, I was wondering, there's a total at the top of retained business rates of just over 8 million. And I was wondering what the tariff was. I'm not really, well, I think I know what it is, but just so I can have that confirmed, what the 5 million being taken away is a tariff, what that actually goes, or what that's for. I would also like to know, obviously, because of small businesses were taking out the business rates, and obviously being a rural area, we do have a lot of agro businesses, which I believe don't pay rates at all because they're zero rated. And I wonder if we actually hold a list of all of these businesses and properties, if you like, that are now effectively zero rated, because the government says they are. And I wonder what the compensation to us as an authority is, effectively to compensate for that if they were rated properties. Because obviously, if we're going to move to this different rating system, where we're sort of obliged to either increase our business base or whatever to actually fund the council, then obviously the fact that we have a lot of non-rateable or zero-rated properties actually means it's we're at a disadvantage to other areas. Obviously, I can stop there. I have another couple of questions which I can either stop there and wait or just plough on. It's entirely up to you.
Adrian, would you like to address those first couple before going back to Councillor Goodale there?
Yep, thank you, Chair. I'll come back to those. In answer to the question specifically, do we have a list? Yes, we do. We do have a list. So I could pull out every business that's zero rated. Just to provide you with a bit of context there, it's actually massively in our favour that the government has zero rated as many businesses as it has, because it compensates us 100% for those businesses. Whereas if it hadn't done, we would only get the proportion of what we collect. So it assumes 100% collection. So we are in an ideal world, they'd zero rate every business, and then we get 100% of the business rate. So there would be no issue. So it's an advantage rather than a disadvantage in that sense. Going back to the tariff, the tariff was introduced as a system of tariffs and top-ups with business rates. And the idea of it is to equalise across the country those authorities that are advantaged from growth as compared to those that aren't. So they set a baseline and they set a maximum limit that you can go to. So if you go above it, the Treasury get to keep that and distribute it for those that go below the baseline. So that's roughly how it works.
Thank you, Adrian. Councillor Goodall, would you like to come back?
Well, no, that's fine. I didn't realise we were that well off that we could actually get rid of 3/4 of our collected rates. But there you go. I suppose.
If I could just explain, Councillor Goodall, you are in a growth area with other authorities from Lincolnshire. Together, they form a pool which enables the council to keep a greater proportion of its business rates income. So it does massively advantage the council in that respect, which is why it enables it to have this system in place.
No, that's fine if we're getting an advantage, but it does seem a rather large amount. Okay, fine. Thank you. One of the things which has been a bugbear of mine, and I don't know how we've proceeded on this. Obviously, as we're moving into now the government's levelling up agenda, as an authority which actually has to include as part of our council tax the drainage board levies. I wonder if have we actually got anywhere with lobbying government as to making that part of the general taxation rather than being forced on our local ratepayers? Not just us, obviously everybody that has a local drainage board levy. We're not the only authority, I appreciate that, but we are again disadvantaged as having to fund this, although we have the advantage of the drainage boards keeping our feet dry. I fully appreciate the work they do, and I'm not denigrating that in any way, but I do think it's about time that it became part of the general taxation rather than being inflicted on certain local authorities that have this burden to bear, as it were. So I wonder, at the last year's budget setting, I did ask that we actually lobby our MP. And I was told by the portfolio holder at the time that was happening, but I haven't actually heard anything or seen anything. So I don't know if we actually lobbied the MP or not, or whether we got an answer or not as to whether that's going to be part of the government's levelling up agenda, that we are actually all, that everybody with the drainage board preceptors actually has that removed and becomes part of the general taxation. And then the other point I would like to make in this is, well, it's in the charges really, and it's just an issue which I have raised it before, but I do, and it's probably not the forum for it, but it is a scrutiny board. With our bulky items collections, I'm in our increase in charges, with the amount of actual fly tipping we pick up and the amount of stuff that to my mind would come under the bulky items, has there been any work done on how much it actually costs us to pick it up, to actually how much we would lose if we actually reduce the charges in the bulky items collections and maybe collected it under that by having a smaller fee than actually sending crews out to actually collect it as fly tip? I keep noticing around. I'm sure I'm not the only area in the borough, and I know every area has problems with fly tipping. But we get 3-piece suites, mattresses, beds, everything appears, and at £18 to get rid of them. I'm just wondering how much it costs us to send a team out to pick it up, and if it's obviously cost us more than the £18, then it might be worth looking at how much we actually charge for this service, and how. Because obviously the finances in a whole rather than as a whole for the council rather than just individual budget headings. So I have wondered on that issue there. But in the actual council tax itself, in the setting, I mean, I actually believe it's about time this council became a little bit more proactive, especially in the house building sector. And I'm a keen advocate of the council actually starting to build its own council houses again. I mean, I appreciate that it sold them off a few years ago, but looking at the housing crisis that we have in this town and some of the housing problems we have, especially in the town, I think it's about time the council started a programme to build houses again. And I'd like to see that put into the capital programme as to whether we actually fund it through reserves or whether we look at some of these grants that are available. That's hence my question earlier for neutral about the carbon reduction budgets that we can get interest-free loans from. If we could get interest-free loans from the government, it would seem to me a no-lose thing for us, that we can actually build houses on interest-free loans and pay them back with the rents which we receive. So that seems to me to be a perfect scenario, but that's another issue which I think needs to be debated. But it's I'd like to see the council have a bit more ambition in its way forward, rather than just trying to stay exactly where it is and try and give the impression of a swan, the old swan scenarios, floating serenely across the pond. We're pedaling like hell underneath just to stay where we are. But I would like to see us actually improve services and improve what we deliver, and that includes the recycling, i.e. fly tipping and litter picking and street cleansing, because I actually think in Boston we're unless we invest more, then we're just losing the battle here, and it's about time we actually invested more and started providing a better environment for the residents to pay the council tax. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Liddell. Adrian, do you want to come back to any of those key points, sir?
I think it's best if I do now rather than wait, Chair, if that's okay. So I think there were three broad points that you made there. One was in terms of investing in housing growth, and I'm quite happy to take that back to the senior management and team and feed that in as part of the budget process, and try and get some sort of paper brought to a future committee about how we do look to do more investment in housing. One thing I would say in terms about the interest-free loans, I know Sarah said that she was going to look into this earlier, but I'd be absolutely astonished, because I think I'd have heard about it and everyone would have, if you can get interest-free loans for building houses in their entirety. What I suspect that you will get is a interest-free loan for the additional energy element of it, the bit that makes it energy neutral. But in terms of building the house in its first instance, I would think that you would have to take out a loan for that. However, loan rates with the PWLB are extremely low at the moment. In fact, historically low. So it's well worth looking at that as a type of scheme going forward. So I'll take that back. In terms of bulky waste and the cost of it, I haven't got that to hand. I don't know if Tim has tonight, but if not, we will look at and do some work and tell you what the exact cost of that is that we think. The problem that you've got here, it's difficult to compare like with like and say bulky waste is affecting fly tipping, because fly tipping will have increased this year because of the closure of tips for a period of time. So you aren't necessarily comparing like with like, but I can certainly bring back to you what the fly tipping incidents have been over the last number of years, and also what the cost of the bulky waste collections are. The first point you talked about was internal drainage boards. Now, what I would say is internal drainage boards is one of the most debated issues whenever I present budgets at Boston or at East Lindsey over the last few years as well. I do agree entirely that when we set out the council tax, what would be best for all concerned is if the internal drainage board levy was shown as a separate precept on that bill, the same way as parish precepts are, the same as the police is, and the same as the county is, and they would therefore be responsible for setting their own budget and charging the council taxpayer for it. There has been moves across the country for lots of affected authorities to get together and lobby the government as one, and that's been done through the work of the LGA at the moment, but I'm not convinced that it's moving at a great pace or that it's moved forward very much at all. But I will make further inquiries on that, because I know that we've received, I think Sedgemoor was the one that were leading on it, but I don't think much has happened in advancement of that. But if what is happening through the LGA. I think that answers all your points. If I've missed anything, just let me know.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Goodale. Councillor Noble, you indicated to speak there.
Yes, just to help Councillor Goodale, because I think the Office Official is attending tonight. Now, we have provided some funds for housing associations like Waterloo to help in the provision of social housing. So the council is doing something in that regard already.
Thank you, Councillor Noble. I'll take it through to Councillor Woodliff there. Thank you for waiting.
Thank you, Chairman. No problem about waiting. Always been used to that. It's fine. Don't worry about that. I'm trying to get. Yep. I think am I working? No, I'm not working.
There you are.
I am working now. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. I've got a couple of questions. Well, first of all, we know that BTAC agreed 0 increase this year, didn't it? So I suppose that will change some of the figures in the report. I suppose presumably the report was written before BTAC decided on no increase for this year. I suppose that's what happened there, but I assume. The other thing is, looking through the report, I see for instance, the return on the property funds, £977,000 a year ad infinitum. Is that realistic? Given the fact that there's a huge sea change in the way we shop these days, whether or not there's going to be any return at all on commercial property as such, seeing as everybody buys everything now from Amazon. And if you actually own the Amazon shop, I would think you're probably facing hard times. So I don't know whether or not the property fund's projection of just below £1 million a year is actually realistic at all. Are we facing any negative interest rates, given the fact that interest rates have fallen to the point where they're zero, aren't they, effectively? I think that the German National Bank is offering negative interest rates, and probably no doubt others are. I think the Bank of England, I'm not sure whether the Bank of England actually agreed on it or just suggested it recently. The interest rates are very, very low. What happens if the banks decide to go for negative interest rates? What plans does the authority have to protect the funds of the council? Because obviously, not much good in handing over £1 million and then finding over that 6 months later it's only worth 990,000 because the banks have nicked a bit. So what plans do we have to protect the investments? If it's the banking investments anyway, if we end up in a situation where we have negative interest rates. So that's really what it is. It's BTAC, zero increase rate. Property funds return, is it realistic for £977,000 a year ad infinitum? And third one, are we facing any negative interest rates given the Bank of England's plans? So that's over to whoever wants to answer it. It's a free-for-all. Anybody wants to answer that? George, you can if you want. Anybody wants to answer it? It's entirely a matter for them, okay? Thanks very much, Chairman.
I'll offer the first opportunity to either Councillor Noble or Adrian there, whoever wishes to fight for it.
I'll come in there, Chair, if I may. In terms of BTAC, I can't remember whether we built the change in or not. I'm not sure what the effect. Tim's saying we have, so that's fine. That's been built in, but it was a modest change anyway. I think it was about £14,000 was the difference at the end of the day. Property funds. There's a lot to talk about with property funds. So the value that we received last year, I think, was about 150 shy of the current budget. But that doesn't mean to say, so that's showing as a pressure this year. That doesn't mean to say that fund won't recover for next year, and there's no reason to suspect it won't. Now, the reason why I say that is because there's two elements to the property fund. It's a little bit like buying a house and renting it out. The value of the property may increase or decrease. That's largely irrelevant until it comes to selling that property. So over the long term, and we recognise this is a long-term asset, the value of that fund should recover. Now, in terms of the rental, that's what we're receiving as the 977 that you're referring to. So long as we're getting that, everything's fine in the long term until it comes to selling them. So it was down this year, but by about 150,000, I think. And there's no reason why it won't recover next year. Now, when you talk about organisations moving online, that's exactly what the property fund portfolio managers do. They move their funds around to where they think the profit is coming forward. So they are far more advanced at this than you or I. They know exactly where the money's coming from in the future. And they'll be in the process of moving their resources around from high street shops towards out-of-town developments and warehouses and that type of thing to maximise that return. In support of that, audit and governance do see property fund managers coming to them on a regular basis, and that's planned in the future as well. So you can ask those very questions of them as well, because it's a much broader topic than we can get into tonight. In terms of negative interest rates, it's a similar conclusion, really. If we get into negative interest rates, I think you need an economist to come and tell you how that works rather than an accountant. But if we end up in a negative interest position, I suspect that's bad news for the entire country, not just for Boston Borough Council. The rates that we are getting on investments at the moment is extremely low, and there's very little in the budget for that anyway. But if they go negative, I suppose the plus that you could say, Councillor Woodliff, is it'd be great to borrow at that point and build lots of houses, going back to Councillor Goodale's point, because we'll be doing it for free. but more seriously, if interest rates go negative, I don't know. I think the country would be in crisis if that happened. I don't ever recall it happening. I'm not aware of it ever happening, certainly in the modern recent past. But others would be better to advise you on that than I.
Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Woodruff, you mentioned Amazon there. Under the understanding that I think one of the largest tenants for one of the fund's investments there is actually Amazon.
Right.
An example there of them spreading the risk around. Councillor Noble.
Yes, just to come back on the issue of the property funds. The income we've had from that has held up pretty well over the last couple of years. The capital value has declined slightly, but as Mr. Sibley said, it's a long-term investment. Just to make it clear, obviously the interest payments that we have to make every year, that's about 394,000, and we have administration costs. We pay to Link Asset Services, they're now just called Link, who are our treasury advisors. That's about 210. So you add those two figures together, you subtract it from our income. We're still making substantial. We're in surplus, let's put it that way, and that money is being put into a specific reserve, a mitigation reserve.
Did forget to mention that, sorry.
That's why I asked you both to answer. Rightio. Yeah, Councillor Woodruff, come back.
Thank you very much. I mean, that's very, very useful information. The only thing is we are seeing a massive sea change in the way people buy things, whereas in the past people went to stores, and looked at things and bought them that way. Now people buy things on the internet. I'm afraid to say even I do occasionally, which is rather remarkable for me, but my children, of course, my two sons buy everything on the internet. And so therefore, the idea of investment in commercial property may not be a long-term certainty for us. And it may well be that our investment may not prove to be as reliable as it is. And as I look at the funds, return on property funds, I know it's gives the same figure, 977 each year. I understand the reason behind that, but there is a risk here, isn't there? I mean, the COVID-19 pandemic has really rapidly changed the way people shop and the way people carry out their businesses. And we always think that perhaps it will go back to what it was, but I suspect it won't. I suspect that the changes that are occurring at the present minute have an effect, an accelerated outcome, which will probably have taken 10 years. In this case, happens only in perhaps 1 year. People move to an online situation where they buy everything online, and not necessarily from within the UK. So it can be bought from anywhere, Luxembourg or whatever. So are we sure that the investment we have is as sound as it is? We borrowed the money to invest. It's not such our own money. We borrowed the money to invest, so we have to pay back that investment. I know, to government. Are we sure that that was a wise decision in mind? I wonder whether Councillor Noble has a view on that. We probably don't suspect. But anyway, I'll pass that back to. They're the thoughts in my mind. We have to live in strange times, and nothing is quite so reliable as it was in the past. So that's the position. Thank you very much, Chairman, for allowing me to come back. I'll stop talking now. Let everybody else get on with it, all right?
Thank you, Councillor Woodruff. Adrian,
thank you very much for allowing me to come back.
I'm happy to defer to Adrian first, and then I'll come in. It's to do with the money we've got invested in the various property funds, but Adrian is the expert, so please let him go first.
Well, far from an expert on it, Chair, but can I just be clear? We haven't invested in commercial properties directly. What we do is employ a property fund investor, and they purchase the funds, and they're the experts to know where to buy in the future. As I explained earlier, these investment fund managers do come to audit and governance on a regular basis, so you are more than welcome to come and challenge them if they think their investment strategies are correct or not. The only other thing I would add is that these have returned hundreds of thousands of pounds to this council already, and they will continue to do so. So if we don't invest in them, and that's after repaying the borrowing, otherwise, without that, we'd have to find savings. So they've helped enormously in the past, and I'm sure they will in the future. But if you don't believe me, and if you want to seek further assurance from that or suggestions, then the place to do it is with audit and governance when the property fund managers come and do their presentations.
May I just add one thing, Chairman?
Yep.
Perhaps we would have done better to bought gold bars or maybe bitcoins and stored them in the depths of the council offices, because it looks to me as though both of those seem to have risen in value in our current circumstances, and property seems to be on the way down.
Thank you, Councillor Woodliff. But I'll definitely.
Thank you for allowing me to come back.
Just to add to that, Chairman, yes, I mean, we've invested with about 5 property funds as M&G, Schroders, BlackRock. Now, their interests are quite widely spread, including things like warehousing. Now, someone mentioned Amazon. So you can be sure these people are fairly shrewd in the way they allocate their spread. So we have no reason to worry at this stage. We've already had 2 of the representatives from various property funds come to speak to us. We've had the man from Schroders. I think Councillor Woodliff maybe even on A&G, and we're going to have those coming in on a regular basis just to advise members what the latest position is, if that helps. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Noble. I'll extend that to all members this evening. If you do want to get more knowledge on that council's investment, do feel free to participate in A&G. You'll find a lot more deeper knowledge on that. Councillor Dorian, thank you for waiting there.
I was rocking back in my chair there. I thought I was way down the list. Be unawares. So, first of all, I'd like to pick up on a couple of points that Councillor Goodale made. And it's almost like I was a fly on the wall in his house. I'm really passionate about this council. I'm really passionate about the fact that we have been bereft of imagination. We've been bereft of ideas. And the only thing this administration can seek to do in their desperation is to shelve off this part of the council over there and this part of the council over here. And house building could be a great way for us to start to invest again in our borough and give local people something really tangible for their council tax. And on that point, and I picked this up with you before, Councillor Noble, about the housing fund, where there is, I think, is it 1.69 million in it? And I know you spoke before and you've said it this evening, that we shunt some of that money into housing associations. Well, they're very, very lucrative organisations now with all the funding they've had. And so why don't we build houses and then, you know, look after our local residents properly and then get the income back from it through rent? Have you thought about that, Councillor Noble?
You're muted, Councillor Noble.
We've considered it, but we'll have to do what we consider or deem to be most effective in terms of a financial return for the council. But I can just make this point, Councillor Dorian. You know, I don't think you're on the planning committee, but now that we have a 5-year supply, we don't get so many contentious applications coming to planning. But one thing that all councillors, I think, on that committee are in favour of is more affordable housing, and we understand that there's a dearth of affordable housing, 1-bed and 2-bedroom accommodation, and we really push for that in planning. So whether that's to part buy, or it's to buy outright, or it's to rent. So there's a various options there. So, but coming back to the essential point, we will do what is most effective in terms of the council resources, because going forward, we know that central government funding is going to progressively diminish coming to this council in future years. So we have to go forward with the precautionary principle.
Well, sometimes you've got to speculate to accumulate, Councillor Noble. I'm sure you would agree with that. And the planning committee is not the administration. The planning committee may want affordable housing to come forward to committee, but then that's delegating the responsibility to other people. So I would like to see some house building. I would like to see it considered, perhaps scoped is the right word that I should use, scoped as a potential opportunity going forward for this council. And now that we're in bed with East Lindsey, to keep the sexual analogies going throughout the evening, to cheer everybody up, they're house building, aren't they? They're developing properties over in East Lindsey, so perhaps you could get some ideas from them. Anyway, let's move on. I might have read this completely wrong after telling Councillor Skinner that I understand budgets, so bear with. On page 18 of the report, sorry, 15, I beg your pardon, on page 15, it talks about the leisure income, Councillor Noble, being at 922,000 for this year. Did we keep that income at that level even through the pandemic?
No, we did not. That was probably the figure that was mooted before, or considered before we were hit by 3 lockdowns. So obviously our leisure income has diminished because obviously some of these sporting facilities were closed for a time, and that just supports the point I made earlier, that we have to be so prudent. We're not quite sure, how soon this lockdown. We're hoping it's going to be fairly soon, but we can't be sure. We can't be absolutely certain there won't be other lockdowns. We can't be sure there might be some terrible variant to the latest epidemic and the present vaccines that we have may not be effective. So yes, our leisure income has gone down, but we have been handsomely remunerated or recompensed by central government for that fact in lost fees and charges. If you wait 30 seconds, I'll give you the figure. Just bear with me.
In that gap there, Councillor Noble, Adrian, would you like to come in?
I would. I was just going to say what Councillor Noble said there, that leisure income has reduced, but the government has compensated us for pretty much all of that loss in reduction. And we're also expecting that to continue into the new year, because the mood music so far is that it will continue to do that. I just wanted to raise an interesting point, if I can, because I do take on board entirely the housing issue, and I will pledge to take that back. And you're quite right, that is happening in East Lindsey, and there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to expand that into the Boston area. It's the point about speculating to accumulate, because that's exactly what we've done in a sense with the property funds. And here we are tonight with other councillors questioning why we've done that. So we're sort of damned if we do and damned if we don't, really. But I do take on board the general principle that it's something we should be looking at.
Thank you. I've never questioned that, Mr. Sibley.
No, I'm not suggesting you have. No.
Okay, thank you.
Just to come back to help you, Councillor Dorian, from the Ministry of Housing, Community and Local Government, we've had 4 tranches of monies for lost fees and charges income. So we have received from central government 1,185,000, and I think in total this council has received in the way of government grants 1.5 million. And that's apart from the 14 million we've given out in business grants to over 1,200 local businesses. So we have been compensated by the government for those lost income from fees and charges.
No, that may I continue, Chair?
Yep.
Oh no, that's great. Thank you, Councillor Noble. So that and you've reported that at all our meetings. So I am well aware of the funding we've received, and you've waxed lyrically about that. So does that explain then why the budget figures look like that? That you've used that funding to top up the fees and charges that were depleted during the pandemic, so that's why that budget figure on page 15 looks as though our income from, say, leisure was 922,000.
Yes, that would have been the original figure. Again, I'll defer to Mr. Sibley, but that would have been the original figure we projected, and obviously our income substantially diminished, but we have been compensated by the government. But I'll hand over to Mr. Sibley. He can probably enlarge a little bit further.
If you like, what we could have done was split it between 2 lines, because we think we'll get that income in its total, either via fees and charges or through a government grant. So we think the total will be the same, but we could have split it into 2 separate lines to show that.
Okay, thank you. May I continue, Chair?
Yep.
Thank you. So what did I want to talk about? Oh yes, page 28 on the heritage line. Let me just find my reference point, please. There we are. Under table 14, under Town Centre Heritage Scheme, there's some slippage this year, and then that looks like, have you just carried that forward into next year, or 21-22? Are you expecting then to spend 1.1 million on heritage projects in the town? I don't mind who answers.
So, well, the 731, it's assumed that will be carried forward into next year. In terms of will it be spent, I don't know. I'd have to go back to the budget holder and ask that and come back to you. But that's what they've told us so far. The extent to whether they will deliver on that, I couldn't say at this time, but I'll go and ask the question and see what their plans are to spend it and let you know.
Yeah, please do, because that sounds like a very big ask to me, and it particularly as the town centre is really struggling. It's on its knees, and you know, I don't know who's going to want to come and invest in business in our town centre now that we've lost Marks and Spencers and Aldridge. The last point I wanted to refer to was
sorry, but we're on that point. Obviously, the Seeker shopfront scheme. You know, that as Mr. Sibley explained, there's been some slippage in terms of delivery of that, and so that accounts for pretty much that figure, most of it. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Then just on Appendix 4, similar to what Councillor Goodale says, I've been doing a huge amount of work around fly tipping, and I am really concerned about the cost of the bulky waste collection, and I do think that has contributed to the fly tipping, especially as people have lost jobs during the pandemic, they've been furloughed during the pandemic, and that's all had a knock-on impact on their finances day to day. And so whilst we can't do it tonight, I would really encourage the administration to look at a pilot project where we could either suspend charges for a period of time. I would like to see a whole amnesty around fly tipping, providing skips and getting our town completely cleaned up once and for all, because if we don't listen to our residents, there'll be some kind of anarchy quite soon. And well, that's hyperbole. There won't be anarchy. There'll be a lot of very, very upset people, even more so than they are now. And it's incumbent upon us as their elected representatives to listen to them and to offer solutions. So I would like to ask administration to look at the bulky item collection fees. And I'll leave it there for now. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Councillor Noble.
Yes, just to come back quickly on that, there was obviously a very strong correlation between the way that our refuse facility has been administered and the massive increase in fly tipping. Now, I think Councillor Doran probably knows there's certain days it's not open. There's other days where you can only take specific items, and that's caused an immense amount of frustration. I've had a lot of complaints from residents about that. I think it was a convenience excuse for LCC because of the epidemic to, in their words, rationalise the system. But in fact, it's made it much more difficult to take their refuse. I'll just give you an example. My car was off the road. I go down there in a van. They won't let me take one single bag of rubbish in because I'm driving a van, even though I'm patently not a commercial trader. And I even said, can I just exit the vehicle and carry the bag in? No, you can't do that. You know, it's like a Stasi operation. It's a disgrace. And so there was a very strong correlation why we've got so much fly tipping, and it needs to change. They need to. There's no reason why the town refuse facilities can't go back to how it was before.
Yeah, and to your point, Councillor, if I may, Chair, I had a meeting with Councillor Eddie Pole, the Cabinet portfolio holder at County Council, about this very issue, and he won't have it. He won't have it. That there is a correlation. It was very frustrating, and he's in your party. So if you can't persuade him, what chance have I got? But I'll give it my best shot when I stand in the county elections, Councillor Noble.
Good for you.
Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. Councillor Wellborn.
Thank you, Chair. Well, can I just go back to the point on the tip, as we call it? I don't know if anybody's noticed, but South Holland have just actually managed to reverse it with LCC by literally badgering them so that they can have their tip open as normal. So that might be something we can go to. That's non-budget, so I'll go to my items on the budget. My first one is the parish precept, which I gather is set at a set amount. Most of our parishes at our side have gone for no increase in the precept. Has this been factored into the budget at all, Jonathan, please?
I would imagine so, but I'm going to defer to Mr. Sibley on that one.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to defer it to Tim, actually, because Tim will know more than this. Just before Tim comes in, what I can tell you is that precepts don't have the, I forgot the word now, the cap that we have. So they can increase their precept by anything they like or reduce it by anything they like. So they're not subject to the same referendum limits as we are. But I'll refer you to Tim because Tim will know roughly what the average increase has been from them.
Thank you, Adrian. Yes, the average parish precept increase as a total on the average has been 3%, which has seen the average parish precept move to something like 468,000.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wellborn. Have you got any other further questions there?
Yes, I've got the housing benefit overpayment on page 16 so stands at 120,000 ongoing. Obviously, that must mean that there's a lot of overpayments that are being dealt with. And surely if they're being paid, it must go down sometime. Can somebody answer that one, please?
I have to refer you to Tim on that one as well.
I'm making him work.
I think the 120 is just the balance which rolls forward each and every time. So at any given point in time, it's not the same 120,000 that remains outstanding, but on average, I believe. So that is the figure taken into account in the budget that, and that is recovered at a later date. So it's 120,000 that's been overpaid and it's just moved on year after year. So, it's a rolling sort of balance.
Right. Thank you very much. I do have one more question, mostly for Adrian Sibley, please. We've set the council tax increase at 2.57%, and I have had this conversation with you. I think that considering that we keep saying that we are extremely well off this year, and I do understand that basically next year we may not have the same amount of money, but I do think it is a quite a large increase to put on the people of the borough when they're not really seeing much for it at the moment. Is there any way we can reduce this amount at all, or are we going to stick with it plus all the add-ons? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wellborn. Andrew.
Well, we have had this conversation in the past, and I do appreciate it's an emotive issue for members. What I would say is it's a political decision to increase your council tax. So Jonathan would probably want to come in and make that comment in a minute. My view is that if you don't increase it this year, you've lost that money forever. That's potentially £100,000. Well, it is £100,000 that you've lost from your budgets forevermore. So next year the gap won't be 700,000; it'll be £800,000 because you could never get that money back. I'd just like to put it in a bit of context before Jonathan comes in. So our share of the council tax is increasing by £4.95, or that's the proposal. The police share of their precept is increasing by £15. The counties at 2% is increasing by about £25. So for an average Band D property, the increase is about £45. This is not including parishes who've gone for higher than we have. Some of them haven't. So the average increase in a Band D property is £45, of which our element of that is £5. So that's not. I do appreciate the emotion here. That's not a massive part of the increase, but it does make a significance to our budget gap going forward. But I do take your point, Councillor, and it becomes a political decision then. So I'll hand you over to Jonathan.
Thank you. Yes, just to reinforce firstly the point about the LCC precept. Theirs is for Band D property. It's going to go up. Bear with me. £26 on a Band D property. The police precept is going to go up £14.94 on a Band D property. To give you some idea of context, for a Band A property, this is per month, because obviously a lot of our housing is in Bands A and B, isn't it? Band A, it's going to go up £2.60 per month. A Band D property, if full council agrees, £3.03. Okay, so we just wish that people, when they get their council tax bills, they would look carefully at how the money is apportioned, because obviously our percentage, as Mr. Sibley said, is actually very, very, well, quite modest in comparison. You also mentioned housing benefit overpayments. I raised this issue with Kelly Clark because it was a concern for me. And what happens is there always will be overpayments. They claw a lot of the money back, but then again, you'll get future overpayments. So it's like a rolling picture, but it is one that's been addressed.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Okay, there's one other, sorry, the other thing I forgot to tell you, yeah, which is important, because you said, I think we're really well off. Well, I wouldn't say that. We've got a notional surplus, but the drainage boards have increased their levy by 2.5%. So we're setting aside 50,000 to cover that. And also we're going to try to increase the wages of our least well paid workers. So at the moment they're on the, how do we score?
They're on the living wage, and we're increasing it to
thank
the
you,
Wage Foundation.
And we're going to, thank you, and we're going to try and put them on the Living Wage Foundation, and we've set aside 36,000 for that. So that's to benefit our most poorly paid workers on the council.
Well, I'm quite happy that you're going to actually increase the wages for the council workers, because I think it's long overdue, and I must admit that if that's put forward, people might not begrudge paying the increase in the council tax quite so much. Thank you.
Yeah, the other point is, we're okay for this year, but the following year we're budgeted to be probably 700,000 short. Now, the Strategic Alliance should give us savings about 400,000. But you see, so the pressures come more in next year, not this year. But we have to be cautious. I said, because there's so many variables. We don't know how soon the local economy is going to recover. I mean, our business rates, our income has halved in the last year. And we've been compensated by the central government, but will that continue? We can't be certain. We used to get lots of money from the new homes bonus, but that's only going to last for another couple of years, and that will disappear. That's why we have to be so careful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Welby. I think you can see here the importance of, well, debating this in multiple forums. I think that's why I'm so pleased it got brought forward to C&C to be discussed in depth. And if we analyse it in a vacuum against the bigger picture, like you say, you've got half the people thinking about the delayed aftermath of Corona, not only this year, but next year. What does that bring? But then also, what do we do with those added funds? How can we put that back into the people? So there's so many things at hand to discuss here. Councillor Dorian.
Thank you. Thank you. There was a point I forgot to ask from my notes, so thank you for that, Chair. On page 18 of the report, where we've, and again, I appreciate that these figures might not be accurate, they might be the same as the leisure figures, but we've budgeted employee costs for next year, 21-22, at 9.9 million, just over that, which is sort of 200,000 up on this year. Have you taken account of the fact that you've just shelved 60 staff?
I can answer that, Chair. No, the impact of the move for PSPS hasn't been factored into these budgets yet, because that was only agreed on Monday. And these papers, if you recall, went out last week. What will happen is when we do present the budget is that the employee costs will come down, but the third-party payments or whatever line we put it on will increase to compensate that. So there'll be no net effect. It'll just be shown on a different line.
Oh, okay. Yeah, thank you for that. Okay, I'll leave it there till there's a proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dorian. So is there anyone else wishing to speak or bring some new points to the table there? Councillor Welborn.
Thank you, George. Sorry for your pain. I just a query on page 16, the other income. Can somebody just tell me what that covers, please?
Indeed, Tim can. Thank you.
Just have a look at a working paper. One moment, please.
I'll make you work tonight.
Yeah.
The suspense.
Yeah, well, it's got lots of things in there really. Sale of energy's in there, renewable heat incentive, and would you believe miscellaneous income 201,000. Renewable heat incentive is 115,000. Sale of energy 132. Under there also that's where we enrolled the BTAC income that is coming off the BTAC budget itself. So that's heading towards the 942. Smaller items in there include car loan interest at £2,000, and very anything and smaller paltry amounts.
Does that include the revenue from toilets at all, please?
Yes, it does. Yeah, that will have been inclusive within the BTAC income. Yes.
Right. My other slight point is that I know at BTAC they wanted to either go for free toilets or to increase the payment. I would like to see all the toilets literally totally redone and then increase the payments. I think we need to upgrade our toilets in the town. If we're going to make the town viable in the future, we need fresh toilets to do so. I think it might be something the Boston Borough Council really need to invest in. Then I wouldn't mind seeing an increase in payments, and it might come under a payment on its own. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Wellborn. Councillor Woodliff, let you come back in there.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'm back on. Takes a bit of time here, I'm afraid. I'm a bit slow. Must be my age, I think. Question I have actually is to do with page 18, actually, and it's partly explained by the information on the other side. That's the direct revenue financing of capital, which this year is 1.8 million, I think, and that next year is 454,000 and so on. Over the page, it says capital financing and direct revenue financing is mainly for capital expenditure funded from reserve contributions. That means does that expenditure therefore mean that in a sense we're taking money out of our reserves to spend on capital gains or such, whatever? What does that mean? Adrian, simply, I think you're probably the best person to answer that for me. I just think you're the key guy, aren't you, on this?
Well, I wouldn't say I'm the king.
No, well, I will.
Okay, thank you very much. There are several ways to finance capital expenditure. One is through sale of assets.
Yes.
Through capital grants that you receive. But one of them is also through your revenue account. So you can use revenue funding to fund capital expenditure. You can't use capital income to fund revenue expenditure. So all this is an allocation. You'll see when you look at the capital program that an element of that is financed from revenue, and that's what that relates to.
Wasn't that policy reversed or something more recently? Because you couldn't use revenue to you couldn't use capital to support revenue, wasn't it? I think.
Yeah, that's what you can't use capital to support revenue, but you can use revenue to support capital.
Is that still in existence? I thought that had changed.
No, that's been the case ever since I've been in local government finance, and it hasn't changed.
Right. Okay. So can you run it through why it's 1.8 million this year and only $500,000 next year? Can you outline that for me?
Not off the top of my head, but I don't know if Tim can off the top of his head, or if it's something we might need to come back to you.
You can give me a written answer if you want. It'll be fine.
Okay, that's fine. I'll come back to you. I'll come back to you later in the week if that's okay.
That's perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
To speak again.
Thank you. Not a problem. And with that said there, with the recommendation in the report, it's for us committee to consider the draft budget and council tax increase and to make comments, which we have done this evening. Do I have a proposal that our comments to be fed back to Cabinet as part of the consultation prior to the budget's approval at full council on the 1st of March? Councillor Ashton.
Happy to move, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And do I have a seconder? Councillor Skinner.
Happy to second.
Pippa, could you please take us to the vote, please? Oh, we've got Councillor Dorian.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd like to move an amendment. I'd like the committee to recommend to Cabinet that there is zero increase in this council's element of the council tax overall. And I think that we use the £98,000 surplus to pay for that. Now, I don't know if I'm allowed to speak yet, but I would like to say a couple of sentences, but I don't want to fall foul of standing orders. So do I have to get a seconder before I can speak?
Jeanette, could I have clarity on that?
I think it'd be best if Councillor Dorian finished explaining her proposal and then second it before moving to anyone else. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And so the reason for that is in the audit and governance papers, and it only struck me after the meeting when I went away and let everything percolate and filter through. And one of the sentences in the papers was that the recommendation was that Cabinet be allowed to decide what to do with that £98,000. And I got to thinking, well, if they can decide to spend it, then why can't we decide to spend it? And so I take on board all the arguments that's been made about the knock-on effect, etc., etc., etc. But still, I think even though it's a tiny amount, overall, £98,000 when we're expecting 101,000 or whatever it is, I think that the local people need a mental health boost. They need a joyous announcement from this council to say that we really care about you as residents, and this one little thing that we can do is to have no increase on our element of the council tax this year. So and a policy question, or no, it's not policy, it's a political question I would ask all Conservatives really is, when will you spend reserves? When is a good time to spend reserves? Because for the love of God, we're in the pandemic that nobody ever thought would hit us. And if we can't spend a little bit now, then when can we? Because this is taxpayers' money we're talking about. They've paid it into the coffers, and I'm suggesting we give a little bit back.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Chair.
Do we have a seconder to that amendment?
Councillor. Second that, Mr. Chair.
Oh, thank you, Councillor AC. I've just got Councillor Wellborn there first.
Yes, I was going to second it.
Okay. Councillor Woodliff, second as well, or? You put your hand back down.
Well, I did put it down. I was too slow, I'm afraid, Chairman. It's the age thing again. So I'll take it down, okay?
So I understand Jeanette would go to a vote on that amendment, or is that incorrect?
Well, Chairman, the first proposal was simply that comments be fed back to Cabinet, which can still happen anyway, by a general consensus, and I'm sure you would all want that. So I feel that the only proposal on the table really is this, the proposal by Councillor Dorian, seconded by Councillor Hasty, to recommend to Cabinet and full Council that it be a 0% increase.
Okay. And I've got two people wishing to speak there. Can I let them come in first?
Yes, certainly. Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Ashton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wasn't going to trouble members with simply repeating points that I'd made at Audit and Government, but since the amount of attention that seems to have been paid to that debate and anything that was said in it, I feel obliged to mention once again that I couldn't support this amendment. I couldn't support this proposal because I couldn't support recommending anything to Cabinet that would make an already large identified deficit next year best part of £100,000 worth, because this proposal does not reflect the reality of local government finance. It does not reflect the fact that we have a cap which prevents us taking a decision to freeze council tax in a year such as this and then make up that difference should we need to balance the budget the year afterwards, because we simply built all that happens because of the cap is that we forego a little over 2%, a little short of 3% rise that we've got this year. We can never ever make that up again. We can't add 2% and this and this year's next year, because the cap prevents us doing that without having a referendum. So in order to close that deficit in 2 years' time, it's necessary to take advantage of the small rise we have this year, as well as the small rise that's anticipated next year, as well as the raft of savings and everything else that I'm sure Mr. Sibley and his team will spend the next year working to identify, assuming that the government doesn't bowl as a complete googly in whatever reforms come down the track in the next 12 months. Having sat through drainage board debate where we've argued 1 year to try and trim the preset by 0.5%, and then it having had literally a rainy year and having to put it up by an extra 0.5%, it makes life a lot easier when you're planning budgets if you can build in that small increase every year going forward. It gives regularity to the council, to Mr. Sibley and his team, and also gives a degree of certainty to people out there in the community that pay our council tax. Because the worst thing, the one really good thing of the cap, for all of its consequences, is it prevents us playing politics, or it should really prevent us from playing politics with the council tax and arguing hypothetically for a freeze 1 year, hypothetically just before an election, and then making up that difference the year after, which is not fair and not good financial sense. So we have a system that works. We have a system that allows us to close a deficit that we know is there, not this year, but next year. If we take the decision to recommend, or if Cabinet were to take a decision not to take advantage of the small increase this year, then it would gravely disadvantage the council next year, and then perhaps we would be into the territory of burning through reserve to make up our capital budget. And if you want to see what happens when a council burns through its reserves to prop up a sustained budget deficit, then you only have to look at places like Northamptonshire, and I think the latest one is Croydon. So that's my position, Mr. Chairman. I am a Conservative, and I know me and Councillor Noble probably take different views on quite where austerity lies or should lie, or where exactly the position on tax going up or down. But fundamentally, I do believe in keeping council tax as low as we possibly can. And I'm very proud that in Boston, our council tax is somewhere around £120 a year cheaper than it is in our equivalent friends over in the city of Lincoln, which has long been a Labour-run authority. So as Conservatives, we do believe in sound financial management, balancing the budgets, and sound financial planning. And only by doing that can we keep the services that our people expect at a price that is reasonable for them to pay. And that doesn't mean going for a completely Pyrrhic freeze this year in order to cause further damage and issues in 12 months' time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Ashton. Councillor Noble, you wish to come in there?
Yes, just to make the point that a couple of years ago, we were spending about 40 million. I mean, our expenditure now is in the lower 30s. We haven't had to cut any services because of prudent financial management.
Thank you, Councillor Noble. Councillor Goodell.
Thank you, Chairman. One of the problems I have with this proposal is not that I'm necessarily against the idea of a zero increase. The problem I have is that I'm ambitious for the council. I want the council to actually improve its services, and I don't really see how we can do that without increasing the council tax by this small amount. Councillor Ashton is correct. We are £120 a year less than Lincoln in council tax, but our services are a lot worse than theirs are. And a few years ago, I've been on this council for a while, and I've seen the council services, although I keep hearing we're maintaining our services are getting worse and worse and worse. People may say they're not, but they are. You've only got to just putting your hands on your ears and your fingers in your ears and your hands over your eyes, or whatever you like to call it, doesn't really wash it with me. I appreciate the people of Boston want services. I also appreciate those services have to be paid for. So I can't necessarily support the amendment. I don't agree with the way the administration spends its council tax, because I would spend it in a different manner. But I can see the reason for increasing it. As I said, I want to see services improve, and I believe the only way they can improve is for increasing council tax and spending some of the reserves we have, because quite frankly, the way from where I sit, the town is slowly descending downwards rather than this rosy picture that the administration keep presenting. So I won't be supporting the amendment, but I also equally necessarily can't support the way the administration spends its money. But that's my position anyway, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Goodall. Councillor Skinner.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to say that I do agree with Councillor Ashton, and I really sympathise with our residents regarding the pandemic. I really do. I do understand that some people will have lost their jobs and had a cut in income from furlough, but I can't support the amendment for the reasons Councillor Ashton has given. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Skinner. Councillor Hasty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can't see how a 1-year freeze on council tax increases could burn through all of the reserves of the council. Now, the residents, especially on my ward, a lot of them have been furloughed, lost their jobs, had to close down their businesses. Their incomes have gone downhill drastically this year. I think as a council, we should do whatever we can to help them out in this time. And if that means sort of like freezing council tax for 1 year, I think it's a small price to pay just for helping the residents of this town. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hasty. Councillor Ashton, I'll let you come back in there.
Yes, quickly. I'm deeply concerned that Councillor Hasty didn't quite understand the point that I was making. Because of the nature of how this works going forward, we wouldn't be able to put £98,000 back in the budget next year if we didn't take this freeze this year. Hypothetically, if we were to take that out of reserves, you would have to take that out of reserves every single year going forward to make up that difference. And at some point, you run out of reserves, and at that point, you have a bankrupt council.
Thank you, Councillor Ashton. With that said, Pippa, could we take a vote on the amendment there?
We can, Chair. If members could state whether they are for or against the proposal or wish to abstain. Councillor Tom Ashton?
Against.
Yourself, Chair, Councillor?
Against.
Councillor Andorian?
For.
Councillor Paul Goodall?
Against.
Councillor Neil Hasty?
For.
Councillor Frank Pickett?
Against.
Councillor Judith Skinner?
Against.
Councillor Judith Walborn?
For.
And Councillor Stephen Woodliff?
For. And Councillor Evans as well?
I didn't get counted in the last one either, but because it had all gone through, I didn't say anything. So, for. Thank you. Against. Against. It was for the one that I didn't get taken on, and against for this one. Thank you.
Thank you. Apologies for that, Councillor Evans.
Chairman, the result of the vote is voting for a 0% increase and 6 voting against. So the proposal has fallen. As I say, you don't need to vote on feeding the comments back to the committee's comments back to Cabinet, but unless there's any other specific proposal.
No, I think you've spoken for everyone there, Jeanette, about feeding the comments back. We've done that, and happy for that to be done. And yeah, so there's no other section of that to vote on, is there?
No, Chairman, nobody else is indicating that they wish to make any specific proposal.
So that would take us over to the work programme, correct?
Yes, Chairman, thank you.
Excellent. Now, I've been back and forth with Andy on this in advance, and we've got an update there about the potential to bring forward the recovery plan, and we've had confirmation this evening that can be done, and also bringing the housing plan forward to a provisional date of the 25th of March. Andy, could you elaborate on that to the committee, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As members will probably be aware, through the senior leadership team, a recovery plan is being produced across the Alliance. The recovery plan is quite a critical document, and at Boston, it's usual that such policies are brought to scrutiny prior to being presented to Cabinet to fit in with a political time frame and not delay the adoption or otherwise of the recovery plan. The recommendation through the chairman would be to bring both the recovery plan and the housing allocations policy to the next meeting, but actually bring forward the next meeting to the 25th of March. That would then follow the normal scrutiny cabinet decision-making process that Boston has adopted. If that was obviously okay with the chairman and with the committee, that would give two substantive papers at a meeting on the 25th of March.
Thank you, Andy. Do any councillors have any comments on that? Councillor Dorian.
Yeah. Sorry, I just went to get a drink of water. What are the two papers? Would you mind just repeating for me?
The first one is the recovery plan, and the next one is the housing allocations policy, the housing plan, bringing that forward, the two of them there to the 25th of March.
Thank you. And what about the COVID debate we were going to have?
Andy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The senior leadership team, I think, contacted the chairman of both of our scrutiny committees to say that with the workload of officers, a formal report on COVID wasn't being recommended to come forward. And I believe that a number of COVID updates have been presented through, particularly Michelle Howard, as Assistant Director of Housing and Wellbeing, through member engagement evenings. Now, if the committee would wish me to go back to senior leadership team and ask for a report to come forward, I think when that was originally placed on the agenda and at the forefront of everybody's minds, I don't really think anybody appreciated that come February 2021, we would still be really at the height of the pandemic. So, Councillor Doran, it was about delaying that in this cycle, because if we bring the April meeting forward, then that would be the last scrutiny committee for C&C of this sitting prior to the annual general meeting, after which we'd then be looking at the 4 new priorities set under the corporate plan and a change to at some point change to the constitution of scrutiny at Boston, given we've changed our corporate plan. But it's only about delaying it, not actually bringing it forward. And I think everybody would appreciate it's actually an enormous report in terms of the amount of work that's been done across a whole suite of services, particularly given the impact that it's had within the Boston community.
No, Andy, I get that completely. I thought we talked about having a standalone meeting, an additional meeting put in the calendar. And I do recall suggesting that we perhaps join up with East Lindsey scrutiny to look at the thing in the round, really.
This was around January time, and I was very motivated as well to get some info on this, and I want this committee to be at the front of the queue to get this information. But I remember speaking to you back then, Andy, and I think the $1 million question's timing, isn't it?
It was, yes. The senior leadership team contacted the chairman and said that wouldn't be something that officers would be able to, whilst they're in the middle of dealing with it, actually prepare a substantive report that would actually do a session justice. So it's not at all about not bringing the information and actually setting out clearly what Boston as a local authority has done. Of course, there'll be a level of partnership that across the Alliance that it's done as well. It was just not bringing that forward at this time. If the committee would like me to go back and present that and ask the leadership team again whether that is possible to bring forward before the annual general meeting and the end of this political year, I'm more than happy to do that.
Well, Andy, I just think it's an important meeting. I think it needs to take place, and I'm not precious about whether it's before the AGM or after. I just don't want us to lose sight of it. And I fully understand the pressures on our employees, and we were informed by the chair that it was the January meeting couldn't go ahead. So I'm no complaints in that regard. I just don't want us to lose sight of that as an initiative.
No, and Chairman, if the next meeting will be the last one of the political year, so the committee may at its next meeting wish to set that as a future item for the 21-22 political year.
Yeah.
It is incredibly important. Everybody, I think, will share that view, I'm sure, regardless of politics, member or officers as well.
100%, Andy. I think to recap there, if you could reach out to the SLT team, that'd be fantastic, and update myself and the committee accordingly. That would be brilliant.
No problem.
Brilliant. Okay, is anyone else wishing to speak on those suggested changes or anything about the work programme in general? Right, so with that being said, I think maybe a show of hands if everyone's happy with the 25th of March there to bring that forward. Oh, is that hand, Councillor Doran, or do you wish to speak?
I thought, yeah, you wanted my hand up.
Brilliant. Well, I see thumbs up, I see clapping hands, I see hands being raised. I think that's a goer there, Andy. So if we could get that in the diaries, and Jeanette, you could be kind enough to circulate that, that would be brilliant.
Yeah. Thank you, Chairman. Yes.
Thank you.
Any other bits, Andy?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, that would bring us to the end of the political year for this committee.
Blimey, time goes fast. Well, I'd like to express a big thank you to everyone this evening. Thorough debate. Thank you for attending, and enjoy the rest of your evenings there.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll stop the streaming on YouTube.
Thank you, Jeanette.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chair.
Well,